As collector of a coal belt district, you sit between two colliding forces, the state's absolute directive and the volatile reality of human survival. Your assignment is precise. Following a high-level review, the central government has ordered you to eradicate all illegal coal mining and theft within your borders. On the ground, you face a violent, organized mafia that controls the supply chains. They are protected by systemic rot. Your own mining officials and local police are reportedly accepting bribes to facilitate the trade. You then encounter a data point that complicates the objective. 5,000 families in your district depend on this illegal ecosystem for their daily wages. They have no other viable economic path. Logic collapses into two rigid extremes. Branch A is an uncompromising crackdown. Branch B is inaction to prevent social unrest. Both paths lead to failure. Immediate enforcement triggers a humanitarian crisis. The complexity reveals the inadequacy of these two failed premises. The women carrying these coal baskets are victims of economic circumstance. If you execute a blind crackdown, you treat these households like the criminals who exploit them. The result is 5,000 families losing their only source of income overnight. Sudden deprivation causes a ripple effect. Families are forced into mass migration, and households turn to child labor to replace lost wages. But choosing inaction, Branch B, is equally costly. The state loses critical revenue as public resources are extracted and sold through unregulated black markets. This aerial view shows the environmental cost of that negligence. Unregulated open-pit mining causes land degradation and water pollution that will take decades to reverse. Permitting this destruction violates intergenerational equity, leaving future citizens with a scarred and toxic landscape. Furthermore, a lack of enforcement signals that the law is optional, which emboldens the mafia and solidifies the corruption within the police force. Mechanical enforcement that ignores human geography isn't justice, it's a breakdown of the state's internal logic. Effectively managing this district requires a multidimensional strategy. Resolving this requires a 7-axis matrix. The legal and administrative mandate is clear, but enforcement is compromised. The economic and social axes demand protecting 5,000 vulnerable families. The environmental axis maps long-term ecological decay, while the psychological axis pits career pressure against ethical compassion. This leads to the ethical dimension, the friction between individual justice for those in poverty and the collective good of the rule of law. By mapping these dimensions, we see no single policy covers the entire grid. We must layer specific philosophical frameworks over the target nodes. We apply our first filter, Immanuel Kant's deontological ethics. Deontology views the law as a categorical duty, an obligation fulfilled regardless of the difficulty. We combine Kant's focus on duty with Kautilya's Arthashastra to address the corrupt officials and the mafia leadership. In organized crime, there's no room for flexibility. The obligation to purge internal rot is absolute. This means immediate suspension of corrupt police, deploying task forces against mafia centers, and enforcing the full law against profiteers. This enforcement is targeted. It creates a surgical isolation of the bad actors, shielding the vulnerable population from the direct impact of police action. Kautilya argued the state's legitimacy depends on purging internal rot. The administrator acts as a custodian, removing those who weaponize the law for profit. Kantian rigidity effectively dismantles criminal networks. However, applying that same unyielding force to the entire district would result in a massive humanitarian disaster. To address the 5,000 families, we need a consequence-sensitive filter that accounts for the long-term impact of our actions. This is John Rawls. His theory of justice introduced the difference principle. A policy is only just if it benefits the least advantaged in society. Under Rawlsian logic, shutting down illegal mines is only permissible if accompanied by a rehabilitation scheme for workers whose lives are disrupted. We can analyze this through Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, which seeks the greatest good for the greatest number. A crackdown triggering famine for 5,000 households creates a net deficit of stability. Such suffering outweighs immediate legal compliance without an alternative. The strategy must integrate skill training programs, MGN-REGA linkage for immediate wages, and the formation of legal mining cooperatives to transition the labor force. Economic reconstruction provides the ethical foundation necessary to enforce the law without destroying the community. Managing these conflicting roles requires a specific psychological posture. You are acting simultaneously as an enforcer of the law and a provider of welfare. Aristotle's virtue ethics defines this through the golden mean, the precise midpoint between two extremes. The administrator must avoid the extreme of cruelty, punishing the innocent, and the extreme of negligence, allowing crime to continue out of misplaced pity. Aristotle called this phronesis, or practical wisdom. It is the capacity to hold these opposing realities in balance, responding with both courage and compassion. This balance defines the psychological distance between reactive bureaucracy and strategic governance. We now translate the analysis into an operational flowchart for the district. Step 1. Immediate, zero-tolerance action targeted specifically at the mafia leadership and their bureaucratic enablers. Step 2. The parallel launch of alternative livelihood programs, ensuring families have an economic exit strategy from the illegal trade. Step 3 is institutional cleansing through whistleblower protections. Step 4 is participatory governance, involving local stakeholders to ensure the community is part of the solution. Step 5 is balanced communication, a public message that the state's conflict is with organized crime, not with those in poverty. These steps reflect Mahatma Gandhi's principles of sarvodaya, the upliftment of all, and trusteeship, where resources are managed for the community's benefit rather than private gain. The matrix demonstrates that ethical theory functions as a technical specification for a functional state. The process moved from a rigid choice between two failures to a strategy that addresses every dimension of the crisis. Advanced administration seeks out the hidden third options that resolve the tension between law and livelihood. Stability is achieved when the enforcement of rules is integrated with the reconstruction of communities. Navigating these conflicts is the metric used to identify the capacity for high-stakes leadership. Ethics in governance is the engineering of a system where justice and humanity function as complementary components rather than contradictory ones.